I've been browsing. Treading water that they drowning. My head on a swivel. Yeah. It's only really my surroundings.
Hello and welcome to episode 76 of the Smash Accept podcast. I'm your host, Michael Royer. You can find me on Twitter at dynasty_dadff. Mung, it is Combine week, and I am super stoked to start seeing what some of these rookies can do, and we get them out there and see some of these measurables and really start to, for me, it's like we had Senior Bowl. We did that. Now all of a sudden we're moving into Combine and we're getting closer to the draft, man. I'm getting excited.
Yeah, one of these years we'll have to make a trip and actually go. But until then, we'll continue watching and just plug in the info into our Excel spreadsheets like nerds. But it's going to be make or break for some of these second-tier running backs, wide receivers. It'll be really interesting to see who tests well and who raises or decreases their draft stock.
Mung, we will lock it up because Dynasty Bro Vic said I can sleep at his house. So he's like, you come down there. They're from Indianapolis. So, guys, I am super excited. We're doing back-to-back podcasts tonight, and I wouldn't do that for just anybody because I want this guy to be on here. This was one of the guys when I first started out in the industry where he had some sweet dance moves in his Tennessee Titans jersey. One of the guys that's just awesome when it comes to Dynasty content. From College to Canton podcast on RotoViz. I mean, he is literally everywhere. Travis May, welcome to the show.
No matter what I do, I'm never going to escape me doing the wobble on Twitter.
Dude, I know. That was, so I started really listening to DTC around those times. And that was when I first started because that was about 5 years ago now, right? And I was like, you did something on there. And I was like, what is this guy doing? But you were rocking the Titans jersey. I got to say, I loved it. It adds a little bit of flavor to it.
Yep. Yeah, that was a lot of fun. I don't even know. It was some kind of weird challenge. The Titans mascot was doing the wobble with some fans. And I was like, man, he's kind of doing it wrong. And somebody, maybe it's John Bosch or somebody else saw me say that and was like, well, so you could do it better. And I was like, look, 100 retweets or whatever.
Don't mess with John Bosch. He will make it happen.
So within an hour, it was coasting to, several hundred retweets. And I was like, oh crap. I'm at work. I'm not going to do this right now at my desk. But so as soon as I got home, and that's still probably my most engaged tweet, probably millions now. I don't even know, but people didn't let me live that one down for a long time. I mean, it's 6 years ago, and here we are.
Is it 6? Yeah. I got to say, though, the other one that's probably I would much rather be known for that than Stompy and his singlet. That was the other thing in the Dynasty industry. It's just that, my kids walked by one time, and it was on my computer screen because he was on the show, and they're like, Dad, why you got that guy in a singlet on your computer? And I'm like, oh, man, this is going to scar my kids. I was like, I had to let him listen to the pod.
Yeah, it wasn't enough for him to just have the singlet on, but he had to zoom in.
Right? Yeah,
it's like, okay.
Stompy's a confident man. He's a confident man, And
for some reason, I don't. Oh man. Anyway, moving on. Yeah,
and on this podcast, we don't want to come up short like that. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna talk about. No, it's the Combine week, Travis. So you got to be super excited. From doing things over at RotoViz with your podcast, College to Canton. I mean, you are firmly involved in Devy. You're big time into these rookies, and now we start to see. We're past the Senior Bowl. We're in a spot now where we get to see some of them test out. And this is something where we're starting to look for certain thresholds and looking for guys to meet certain numbers.
Yeah, speaking of singlets, right? It's the Underwear Olympics this week. So
it is.
I'm really excited. And I think it's always fun because, well, I kind of just lean into the chaos and poke my friends that I know, they're nerdier than me. And so they know all the signal related to all the testing, from a statistical perspective. And then you have the people that don't really know much at all. They're just like, oh, yeah, the 40 is everything. And so on Twitter, they all meet and they all argue for a few weeks here, and I think it's just hilarious.
Yeah, we have draft Twitter meets fantasy Twitter, and they all just kind of they start arguing back and forth. I saw your tweet today. I mean, some of the things that we're looking for, obviously wide receiver athleticism. What are some things that you guys are trying to look for? I mean, there's some this wide receiver class looks pretty exciting, and I know this class, we've had people talk, isn't anything compared to 2023, but there are some nice pieces in here, and there's some wide receivers who I think will test out really well day one.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, with wide receivers, it's a bit weird for wide receivers specifically because we at RotoViz like our freak score. Like it takes a look at their overall athleticism and like size adjusted speed and things like that to try to add some value. And it might add a very small amount of value to a player's projection, but exclusive from what it just does to their draft capital. And I'm not really sure. So like I'm looking for players that, basically outperform their projected expectation more than I am just like a magic number because at this point there's so many mocks and there's so much consensus data running around now like more than ever that we kind of understand where a lot of these wide receivers specifically are projected to go, especially like the early round guys. So yeah, I think it does help capital if you eclipse like sub 4.4. But there's not really like a magic number given your height or weight that says, hey, this player is going to hit. For the most part, we want to see guys break, at least 4.6. There are some exceptions that were slower than 4.6, but there's not many. And so, but what was really weird though about wide receiver athletic testing, specifically with the 40-yard dash, is that if you do statistical testing on it, you'll actually find a negative correlation between being fast and working out in the NFL, just slightly. And that's anytime I bring that up, they're like, wait, that's impossible. How would it be better to be slower? And that's not what I'm saying. It's actually, this has been explained by several other people, but I just like to bring it up and kind of explain it like this. It's a sampling issue. Like we zoom way in as far as you can. And anybody who even gets an NFL combine invite as a wide receiver, you're already in like the 99.9th percentile of athlete on the planet. And so we zoom in so far that we don't really see that there's any value added when you're slightly faster, like a 4.4 versus a 4.55, translating into fantasy points. In fact, it's ever so slightly the opposite, which is an odd concept. But obviously, if we all lined up at the NFL Combine and we were all running 5.5-second 40s left and right, the signal would obviously indicate, yes, it's better to be faster to succeed. But it's called Bergson's paradox. If you listeners, if you want to look it up later, it's basically just a sampling issue. But really, it doesn't really mean much if you run a 4.41 versus a 4.59, especially given your respective size. So I'm not really looking at that. I want to see how your athleticism translates to your projected role. So I'm looking for the smaller, shiftier guys. I want to see your 3-cone drill, and I want to see your 20-yard shuttle. For the big guys that are in contested situations, I love to see guys, kill it in the vert and broad jump and be really bursty. When something doesn't match the tape, I guess, when something doesn't match our expectation in a good way or a bad, that can knock a player down like a full round of draft capital. So that's what I'm concerned about, how it's going to affect their draft capital, because draft capital itself kind of functions as a conglomeration or model to project a player's future. And it's really just an expression of all the stats, all of the film they put together, all their athletic testing, all in one. And that speaks way more volumes to a player's projection than just a 40-yard dash time would.
Thank you. I mean, because our listeners are asking that all the time. They're like, what are we looking for? What kind of speed should everybody have? And everyone really pays attention to that 40 time. I'm glad that you said that based off of what type of wide receiver they are and things like that. Travis, the real question is, if you're running the 40 today, what are you timing out at?
It's funny. Like right now, I'm having some back issues because I'm old and broken. But I think
that's part of being a dad.
Yeah,
for you guys don't know, Travis is now a father. So that comes with the territory.
Got a 3-month-old son, so I'm a little bit slower than I normally would be. But even last year, for my my flag football league, like our church league that we take way too seriously, we've been doing for like 5 seasons now. We actually held our first inaugural combine, and I put everything together, and I got I built out a custom Spark score that puts the average performance like weighted score right at a 100, and so I nerded out way too hard with that.
That is awesome.
Anyway, so like there was only one person that got under 5 seconds, and I was like a 5.08.
Okay.
So not great, but none of us are training. We just showed up on a Saturday morning and like not, some of them didn't even have cleats.
Yeah.
And just like, hey, let's just run. Let's see what happens. So it was embarrassing and great, but yeah. So
That was
clock man
really
for
cool.
maybe like a 5 flat.
Okay, that's what last year in that Buffalo Bills game I ran a 5 flat in skinny jeans, but I think I think they boosted it up. They're like, this guy's 40, we're gonna kind of get it in there. Mung would definitely toast both of us, right?
Oh no, I got long strides, but I'm not fast. I'd be lucky to crack 6 seconds, I think. But I would just tell people I pulled my hammy towards the end of it, so that's really what caused it.
That's a good way to do it. So, Travis, what I've been asking everybody is there's a huge disconnect right now, and everyone is super excited for that 2023 class, and we're almost overlooking some of these prospects. From a dynasty perspective, we had on multiple people here. We had Jeff Bell, Matt Hicks. They were both saying there was probably about 7 guys that would go before the 101 this year. Whoever is going to be in that situation right now. I still have it at Burks, but talk to me a little bit about the 2023 class, because you are deeply involved in Devy, and how excited we should be, but we shouldn't, compared to this class. There's so many people. I use the example. I saw one of our listeners traded the 103 for a random 23 first, and like this class is still going to have some nice players in it, and 2023 is exciting, almost like people that were in 2019 and they missed up on 2020 picks are feeling a little bit like it's a similar type situation.
Yeah, we always want to look ahead, and we always want to have the next best shiny thing. And that's what the 2023 rookie class looks like, especially right now. Like Bryce Young from Alabama, CJ Stroud, Ohio State at the quarterback position. It's those top 2, and then there's a really solid hard gap after that. But there are several players who could leap up into top tier quarterback discussions. But what's really fun in fantasy football is that it looks like an absolutely stacked running back group. And so that's what we really love is young running backs. And there's probably going to be maybe 4 or 5 names that are worth taking relatively early next year. So I think that's really intriguing for us fantasy nerds. And then the wide receiver group is as good or better than this year. And this year is probably, a solid 10 options deep that probably stick and work out and have a real role. So knowing that the running backs are way better, wide receivers are probably similar or even a little bit better. And the peak profiles of the 2 quarterbacks are perhaps better than any quarterback this year. I get the excitement, but we are waiting a full year of not seeing that production. So I think the value in getting the best third best player in this class, that's potentially the running back 1 in the class in Superflex leagues, or that's potentially your wide receiver 1 in this class, or potentially your quarterback 1 in this class. Like that's a big deal. So getting a full year production, especially if you're in a win now situation, moving like that, for that example you gave, moving the 103 for a random 2023 first, which might be the 1.07, 8, 9, like that's not what I would do. I wouldn't go that far, because I think it's going to be still pretty good. But I mean, like next year, there's like 3 wide receivers that could just sit out the entire season, and they'd already be first round picks in my opinion. Like Jackson Smith and Jigba, Ohio State, he doesn't have to do a friggin' thing like at all. Kayshon Boutte, LSU, nope, doesn't have to do anything at all. Like as long as he's healthy, we're good to go. Jordan Addison, even Pitt, I think he's probably done enough as well. All those guys I think would be first round picks. Josh Downs, North Carolina, wide receiver. I think he's almost to that point. I mean, he was leading the nation in so many categories for much of the year, being really the only decent receiving option for North Carolina this past year. But I mean, I could go down a list, 25 deep of guys that I'm really intrigued about next year. So I get the hype. I'm just like, whoa. Don't go too far with it.
Right. No, I get that. I'm just trying to reiterate that for our listeners, is because we get so many questions on trades. I mean, we are a trade podcast, and they're always, what am I doing with this 23 first? People are trying to, they're seeing moves out there where, people are getting Cooper Kupp for a 23 first, or they're getting a top-notch asset, and it's all price dependent, obviously. But I'm trying to get all of our people that come on, as analysts, to talk about that, especially someone like yourself who deals in Devy so much, and I think for our listeners out there, and myself and Mung, I mean, we both want to get into Devy as well. What would you say to someone who's like trying to start out in Devy, and how deep they should go into it, and why that makes them a better overall, like, not just get more involved into college, but a better football fan in general?
I think it's just it brings just a brand new perspective. I think if you understand where players come from and their journey throughout college football, you can kind of ignore a bunch of the ignorant noise that happens around this year with just terrible takes when it comes to a player's athleticism or the context surrounding their production profile or something. Like, people just talk this time of year and they have no idea what they're talking about. They just and it's okay. Like, it's okay to start in March. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. But I think we're missing key variables with a lot of players sometimes when we're starting in March with these rookies, or even January with these rookies. Because I mean, like, you're gonna figure out and learn everything you need to know about 30 plus wide receivers and 20 running backs and a half dozen quarterbacks, and it's just a lot of information. So sifting through and understanding the full career of a player, I think there's some added value there. I know that I've gotten into arguments about anchoring bias and like having take lock on players. And honestly, I think I used to have that issue coming from a Devy perspective, having a particular opinion about a player over the course of his 3-year tenure at Georgia or something, and then not being able to adjust when he's drafted earlier than I expect. And I think that's real. But I think it's what you do with the information. But more than anything, it just gives you a brand new portion of football and football players and teams to just get excited about and enjoy. Like, that's it for me. Like, I started dabbling in Devy leagues, I guess 2013, 14 maybe. And then I just dove head first and did several. And I didn't really know. I thought I knew a lot about college football, but there are 130 FBS teams. And so it's such a labyrinth of information to sift through. It can be overwhelming at first. So if you're brand new to it, I wouldn't try to jump off the cliff and do a 50-round deep Devy. That would be a little bit too much. You won't even know the names once you get to round 15. But you get your feet wet. Even maybe if you're jumping in with a bunch of new people together, build it in where you actually expand the draft over time. That's one of the best models I've seen, where you start off with just 2 or 3 rounds of Devy, where you can roster, as a league, 24 to 36 players initially, and then year 2 you add 1 round, year 3 you add 2 more rounds, and just expand it and build it into where you get to a point you think that's about right. Maybe the sweet spot is 6 rounds for you guys. Maybe it's 10. Maybe you go crazy and make it a full scale college to Canton league where you have a full college roster and an NFL roster, and both teams score. That's a whole different animal itself. But I'd ease into it and build a league if I was starting over from scratch that kind of naturally expands with my growing interest and knowledge base.
I love that. I mean, Mung and I have been talking about it for, a couple of months, where it's like we want to kind of dip our toes in there. That's something new. But I know, College to Canton's like a whole nother beast. And Katie Flowers talked about that on here. And the one thing I want to say that you said that is just so important, and I saw Ray GQ tweeted it out today too, is like, we have so much noise out here right now about fantasy rookies, and our rookie drafts. And that's why at Smashing Trap, I mean, we have, like I said, we had Matt Hicks, we have you on, we have Thor Nystrom coming on, like trusted people. Make sure when you guys are listening to rookie content, you're not just taking everything in. You want to find those guys that are trusted. Travis, for me, I got 2 guys in the top tier here for my wide receivers, and that's Treylon Burks and Garrett Wilson. Would you put anybody else in that top tier, and how do you differentiate those guys?
No, I wouldn't. That is the end of my top tier right now as well. I think actually I may have said that on the I almost said Roto World, but the NBC Sports Edge, a good football show here recently with Pat Curran, and really it's those 2 guys and then everybody else for me. And I guess from the sounds of it, you were in that same camp.
Yeah.
But I didn't know that was kind of normal to have it 1-2 and just be really, anchored in there, I guess. Convinced that that's the clear top two. But and it's not that I think the other wide receivers are bad. I think that like I said, there's like 10 that I'm really interested in. But it's just those two I have less questions about. And it's so funny because they're such different players. I do have questions about how Treylon Burks is going to be used. And you probably heard tons of people say this, but he was mainly a slot wide receiver at Arkansas, which is odd for a 6'3", 225-pound monster.
Yeah.
But
and
I think
that people have been. I mean, there's a lot of people are giving him, saying AJ Brown with a little bit more wiggle or a slightly larger Deebo Samuel. I know you're a Tennessee guy, so you're like, you hear AJ Brown. I got a man crush on him. I'm not even gonna lie, but I mean, Treylon Burks has some of those type tendencies, and he's my wide receiver 1 in the class. John always has Garrett Wilson. Mung hasn't. We haven't quite gone where your guy is. I believe you're in that same camp. You and I usually, are, but Treylon Burks has the upside to be, in my opinion, a guy that, if utilized, could be a wide receiver 1 in the NFL. And I think Garrett Wilson is close as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And Burks' usage was a little bit odd in that just schematically, they Arkansas loved to run. KJ Jefferson added some value with his legs, and they like to do a bunch of short stuff, even throwing some screens to Burks. And then when they really get in trouble, they just YOLO ball it to Burks, and it works most of the time. And it's hilarious. Like, why don't you just do that more? Like the back shoulder fade, or just the chuck it downfield, and Treylon Burks is down there somewhere, and that absolutely works. But I think he's going to be a little bit more challenged. He needs to round out his game quite a bit. He's just like a DK Metcalf. He's not going to be that fast, by the way. But just like TK, he was not perfect. DK was like a left wide receiver that only did curls and goes, like, and maybe a slant, maybe an out here and there. But like there was nothing to his game. Like it was very simple, and it was because all he needed to do was just dunk on tiny little college players most of the time. Mm-hmm. And because he's, even in the NFL, like a top 5 or 6 athlete at the position, if not the most impressive athlete at the position. So Burks has the potential to be there. I think he's more around like a 4.44. I don't think he's going to be a 4.34 like Arkansas fans might believe. But
I know if he runs a sub 4.4, people are going to
they're going
to lose it. And the thing is, I mean, because he's 6'3", 225 and great with those 50-50 balls. The one thing at the combine, Travis, that over the years that I've noticed is like people will double count that, right? Treylon Burks, we know, is going to run close to a 4.4, but if he runs a 4.39, all of a sudden people are like, oh, that's it. You got to go up and get him, and I think that's one thing that I've noticed in the combines over the last couple of years is like people like to double count stuff. They like to just, if they test how they think we're going to test, then they're like, oh, that was great. Let's move them up.
And that's exactly what I try to avoid. Like I'm looking for players to outdo what my expectation is, not just confirm what I already know and then move them up even higher. Mm-hmm. Although I guess, you can make an argument that there's some value in actually seeing it happen, but it's so minuscule. Like, it's just so minuscule. Like, so I think we all know Burks is projected to be a sub 4.5. If he's 4.51, I'm not going to panic because that's average actually for wide receivers, and he's huge. So don't throw the panic button on if he doesn't, just go bonkers with a, sub 4.4.
Yeah,
Garrett Wilson. Then. Oh, go ahead, Mom.
I was going to say people panicked on, I think, Metcalf, right? When he was a 3-cone that he didn't run particularly well, and everyone was like, oh, he can't do anything. I mean,
it was a Tom Brady level 3-cone. I mean, it was some of us would be in that same realm.
But it was real bad.
Like Travis, when you're looking at these where you're saying, okay, if he runs like a 4.5 40, it's not the end of the world. Are there certain metrics where you would say, okay, now this is like a clear red flag where I might consider dropping him into that second tier?
I think if he's just like worse than 4.6 out of nowhere for some reason, and we were just kind of wrong about his initial 40-yard burst, I think I would be worried, but not because I think that changes what he can do. I think it would just be that it probably negatively affects his draft stock and maybe early career opportunities. by extension. So I think I already am pretty confident looking at a player with like a 94th percentile adjusted production index and not many questions from how he dominates. So it'd be really tough to really move him down like a full tier, but the gap wouldn't be so wide. And I think Garrett Wilson might be my clear wide receiver one in his tier by himself.
Okay, so you have Wilson.
I
like it.
Yeah, and I didn't even mean necessarily just like the 40. I mean, in general, are there any metrics where if they test, poorly enough where that's a red flag for you, whether, it's the 3-cone, whatever it might be?
Yeah, but again, it's only if I think it's going to negatively affect their draft stock. So like DK Metcalf was like a 4th percentile 3-cone, which, and so that actually probably did hurt his capital. Like when you look back on it, Andy Isabella went before DK Metcalf, and I don't think that happens if he didn't completely flop in that one particular athletic measurable, and even in his shuttle, I think he was like 3rd percentile or something too. Like it wasn't as obvious. Like I think more people look at the cone, but his shuttle wasn't good either. And so his agility score was like the 1st percentile. And when we already have concerns about a player not running any route diversity, which I think is an overrated thing that we overvalue, but it's real. Like if you already have concerns, like, man, is he ever going to do anything other than a curl and a go at the pro level? And is that going to be a problem? And I think enough teams question that twice and passed him like over and over and over again. And so I think if a player is sub, like bottom quartile and just about anything, I'm probably docking them a little bit in draft capital projection. And so that will change models slightly.
So we talked about the way Burks wins. I mean, Garrett Wilson wins totally different, right? I mean, he's just a polished route runner. He's got that speed. And I think, we talked about Burks' situation could be definitely affected by draft where he goes. I think Garrett Wilson's going to win most situations where he goes. I mean, I really like watching his tape. I just think Burks has that higher ceiling. Would you agree with that? And how excited are you for Wilson?
I think I'm really excited about Wilson because we knew he was good when he was like 16. Like I'm a major recruiting nerd, and coming into, I'm in this one league where we're drafting. It doesn't matter. We're drafting people way too far out.
He had a good quarterback in high school, though.
Yeah, he did.
Baker
but like,
Mayfield.
We knew that he was gonna absolutely smash. Like he was a wide receiver 2 in his class. He was a 5-star talent, and he leaped through the roof even as a high school kid. Already had NFL speed as a high school kid, and so there was really not many questions when he jumped on the field and immediately succeeded in ways that they asked him to out of the slot, and then they shifted him outside, and he won there too. In any role in any season, he was progressing and showing that he was an efficient wide receiver and checked all the boxes, at least from a minimum threshold perspective, like over a 30% dominator, 3.2 yards per team pass attempt, good marks for touchdown per team pass attempt, any kind of production metric like yards per route run, like that. He was solid enough, even when he was splitting targets with a future first rounder in Jackson Smith and Jigba, and probably another first rounder in Chris Olave.
Yeah, I want to stay in that. We're going to move to running backs here a little bit because, again, I have 2 guys in my top tier, and I have a 3rd guy like super, super close. Isaiah Spiller for me is the running back 1 in the class for me, followed by Hall and followed by Walker. Can you talk to me about those running backs? Those are the guys, I mean, we all know running backs is what everybody wants to hear about when it comes to fantasy football. Those are the guys that are probably going to start moving up draft boards a little bit more. You look at a lot of mock drafts now, and, Burks and Wilson are up there towards the top, but Spiller, Hall, and Walker are 3 guys that a lot of our listeners are really asking about.
Yeah, I mean, because it's those 3 that we have any expectation of going very early in the draft. I don't think there's going to be any first-round running backs this year, and that's okay. Like maybe one guy gets reached for, like if Hall actually really wows at the combine more so than we think, or Spiller does too, given the fact that he came through the SEC and posted 3 back-to-back impressive seasons, and not only that, improved against the toughest competition. Like his first year knock was that he averaged like 3.2 or 3.3 yards per carry against SEC competition and only smashed bad teams. But he really rounded that out in the 2020 season when they basically only played SEC competition. And then in his final year, did just the same. Kenneth Walker, he was nowhere near this conversation a year ago for Devy leagues. And 5, 6, 7, 8 round leagues, he was unrostered just a year ago. And because we didn't really know what was going to happen. Like, he was going from Wake Forest, a situation where the offensive line play was absolutely terrible. Their yards, like, before contact allowed for the running backs was like 80th or 90th in his first 2 seasons. It was really, really gross. And he got out of town. I made the wise decision. And, Mel Tucker was like, hey, man, we're going to build this offense around you. And obviously that worked out because he almost won the Heisman this year. He was like a Heisman semifinalist. So kudos to his performance this year. But I think some are going to have questions about his receiving. And that's valid. I think in high school, he actually was a decent receiver, had some experience there. But it's very different catching a ball from an NFL quarterback than it is a high school quarterback. So we haven't seen much precedent in recent years of guys immediately becoming like this receiving threat at the running back position if they didn't do it much at all in college. Like the one recent example where the player did grow into that role, though, was A.J. Dillon for the Green Bay Packers. Like, there was a season where he had 300 carries and 0 receptions for Boston College. Like, how in the world is that even possible? And then he shows up and just ease him into that role, and they eventually turn him into a 30-plus catch kind of back. And that's if Walker can do that by year 3, that's fantastic. But I think he's probably going to be limited in that regard in year 1, whereas Spiller and Hall, I have no question about their ability to contribute in all facets of the game. I think Hall is a little bit more athletic. I think he's a little bit smoother as a runner, and he's got the more impressive production profile, albeit against maybe slightly softer competition. But he's a more amped up, better version of David Montgomery, and we've already seen him find success at the NFL level, coming from the same program there. And Spiller, I think one thing that no one's really, that I've heard, has expressed concern over is that he actually was kind of a timeshare back at times at Texas A&M, like sharing a lot of work with Devon Achane, who was way more explosive than him, actually. And to be fair, Achane's probably the fastest running back in the country, but still, he was, he wasn't like this huge feature that had back-to-back 1,700 yards from scrimmage seasons like Breece Hall. So I give the edge to Hall, but Spiller and Walker both deserve to be in the conversation given their skill sets.
Well, I think, and I'm glad you said David Montgomery, because I feel like a lot of people are almost, this class is similar to that, right? It was like Jacobs, Sanders, and Montgomery, and those are guys that were like, they're going to be solid RB2s for you, right? Like, none of them are guys where you're like, if I draft them as my RB1, I'm going to feel comfortable. Like, those are that. Do you think these guys fall into that same territory where these are guys that are going to be, solid producers in the NFL, maybe RB2s for your fantasy team? Or do you think any of them have the upside of potentially being an RB1, even if it's back end?
I think Breece Hall does. I think he can carry the load year 1 and take 250 plus carries. I don't think anybody's going to be a Najee and immediately be a running back 4, running back 3 overall right out of the gate. But I think the guy that I would be most confident in doing that out of this crew would be Breece Hall. But I think we have, a lot of guys, I guess not a lot, but all 3 of the guys could be that Javonte Williams that we all project super high, and then he just gets committed, and it's frustrating. I think that could happen for all 3. But I think whichever one lands with like the Texans, despite how bad they're going to be, they're just going to force feed that role. So I think that person, regardless of which running back it is, probably becomes the consensus running back 1, just because they're going to see a bunch of work.
Yeah, and then
sleeping on Rex Burkhead.
yeah, totally.
David Johnson still, right? So we went over the top 2 running backs and the top 2 wide receivers. Now, I know you play in a lot of super flex formats. I mean, that's all I play now. That's what most of our listeners do. Are there any quarterbacks? A lot of people are having Willis up there. I've actually had one analyst come on and say they have Pickett above, most of the wide receivers and running backs here. Talk to me a little bit about the quarterback class, and if we're most of the time, what I'm seeing in mock drafts is I'm seeing Willis go early, and then I'm seeing all of these guys go and the quarterback's starting to get pushed back. But we're looking at 5 guys who could, at least 4 guys who are looking at getting drafted in the first round. These quarterbacks get first round draft capital. They look good at the combine. We might start pushing them up a little bit.
Yeah, I think coming into this process, there were 6 names even that were in the mix for first round draft capital. And I wouldn't rule necessarily any of them completely out. I don't think that Carson Strong deserves to be anywhere near the conversation just because he's such a liability from a sack perspective and athletic perspective. Like, I mean, the dude had negative 20% rushing yard market share last year. Yes, he's
Never
coming
heard
off
of that. Yeah, that's crazy.
So, I mean, basically, because of how sack yardage is counted against you in college, you can have negative percentage of your team's rushing yards. And he seriously had negative 20% of their rushing yards. It's just terrible. Like, it's just laughably awful. And yes, he was coming off a procedure on his leg. But even the year before that, it was negative 8%, which is also trash. Like, it's really, really bad. Like, it would be the most immobile quarterback to see round 1 capital in the last 10 years, I believe. And in fact, since 2016, the only quarterback in their peak passing season from an efficiency standpoint had negative rushing yards. And that player's name was Josh Rosen. So like in terms of first round quarterbacks, yeah, that worked out great. The NFL's done with guys that are absolute liabilities in that regard and can't add some value with their legs. Josh
Rosen did add some value to his teams. He locked up the 101 for their teams. You know, he did it 2 years in a row.
Yes. Oh my gosh, such a sad mess. But Mac Jones was the exception this year because he had like 2 back-to-back seasons of like 95th percentile and above pass efficiency, and so we kind of saw a player whose passing efficiency outweighed his ho-hum, like barely above 0 rushing yards type ceiling. But here's the thing. He's never going to be a top 5 quarterback because he doesn't run, and it's never going to happen. He could throw 45 touchdowns, and he'll probably be the QB7. You know, so like I'm not interested in that type, and that's why Carson Strong's not in the conversation. But the rest of the guys can add value with their legs. Like they have at least one season, all of them, of 15% or more rushing yard market share for their teams. So that's intriguing, and all of them except for Malik Willis have at least 90th percentile passing efficiency metrics in their peak year. And Malik Willis only doesn't because he just likes to throw picks and just he has to, you know, carry the load for his team. But he has the highest upside given the tools for sure. And that's why that's why he's going to be the first quarterback off the board in the real draft and many Superflex drafts. But I think Matt Corral and Sam Howell are probably analytically safer than Malik Willis is.
No, I like that. And I just feel like right now that mid to late first is starting to feel a lot better. You know, like there was a time here when we jumped into this process, you know, in February, and we started talking about things, and it's like, ooh, who we taking here and there? But some of these quarterbacks are going to push up. I like some of these running back and wide receiver values. I mean, the term for Willis is toolsy, you know, and he's going to end up being that guy that goes 101 in a lot of these drafts, but might not get onto the field right away. Talk to me a little bit about like him being at Liberty and what that does, and you know, what kind of perspective do you have on him?
Well, yeah, he has a weird journey. Started out at Auburn and was not going to see the field because Bo Nix's dad was a former player there as well, and so Bo Nix being a 5-star quarterback coming into the process, there was no way, regardless of how good Malik Willis was, that he was even going to get a look at that starting role as long as Nix was there. And so he realized that and pieced out and went to a situation where, you know, Hugh Freeze goes to Liberty and is like, hey, man, I've got this fun offense. I want you to run it. And in his first year there just goes off. It is a really fun dual threat. We see the raw tools and raw ability, but, you know, from an efficiency standpoint, the peak's just not really there, right? And so this past year, for most of the year, he looks even better than the year before from a number standpoint, and he's making ridiculous 60-yard throws down like on the move, and it's a lot of fun. You see the tools every single game, and then he misses a really dumb easy throw over the middle for an interception, multi-interception game against, you know, University of Louisiana Monroe, and you're like, what who is this? Like, why do I care about this quarterback at all?
Yeah.
And so you see the highs and the lows, but the NFL, they're addicted to the highs. So they're going to take him regardless because he's probably going to run like 4.4-ish if he does run the 40. And we haven't seen something like that since RG3.
Yeah, and I think the lazy comparisons, people are trying to say more Lamar Jackson. I think we're talking not quite even Jalen Hurts type ceiling. You know, they like kind of more in that area. Because I don't know if I'm completely off base on that, but I'm hearing people like, oh yeah, he's going to be Lamar Jackson light. And I'm like, no, Lamar Jackson was, you know, like an MVP here in the league. And he's actually, you know, better in every single way imaginable.
Yeah, I mean, he had just a better profile from a pass efficiency standpoint, a competition level, and better rushing numbers. It was just hard to do because Malik Willis in his peak accounted for like 37% of Liberty's rushing yards, which is just nuts for a quarterback. Yeah. I mean, the minimum threshold I like to see is 5%. Like if you're a stud rushing quarterback, you know, over 15%, and he had more than double that. So. Fantastic for a Konami code type of projection. Yeah. So I think he probably is super valuable early on because of his legs, even if he's like, just like Jalen Hurts, even if he's like the bottom 3 in pass efficiency in year 1, like it won't matter because he had so much value with his legs. And by the way, the league was just wrong on Jalen Hurts. Like his peak season at Oklahoma was above the 90th percentile. Like I believe it was like 94th percentile from a pass efficiency standard. When you adjust for like schematic variables like play action percentage, jet motion percentage, his average depth of target, any kind of advanced metrics from a passing standpoint, like it's kind of odd that he dropped to pick 52.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, since we're on Jalen Hurts, and I love Jalen Hurts, he's someone in Dynasty that I feel like we're moving him back way too far. Like as if, you know, because Philadelphia hasn't made the strong commitment and there's been rumors there. But I mean, I think Jalen Hurts puts up nice fantasy numbers. I mean, as an Eagles fan, I enjoy watching him play, but it's like he progressed this year towards the end where I thought he's starting to put himself towards an area where he's feeling a little bit safer and he's still got that great upside.
Yeah, I completely agree. I'm right there. I'm a believer. And honestly, even if it doesn't really work out perfectly from this point on, your initial investment in a Jalen Hurts, unless you overpaid after he went off, you've already, you know, seen a huge benefit. Like in Superflex leagues, even he was going late round 2 or round 3 or beyond in some spots. So, which is just nuts for a guy who brought that value with his legs. I know at the time, I guess Carson Wentz was still there, and so we're gonna have to wait for a while. But we saw how that played out.
Yeah, I saw him. I mean, I was grabbing him at 212 on my contender teams all over the place. 212, 211. Are there any quarterbacks in this class that might go under the radar? Some of the guys like that, like, I mean, Jalen Hurts was a much more higher profile, but a guy that might go under the radar who has some super flex value here.
Bailey Zappy. He's not going to add a bunch of value with his legs, but if somebody does surprise and goes the Mac Jones route and accidentally makes their way into a starting role, like Kirk Cousins did, you know, being a day 2 guy, I think Zappy could slot in. If you're not familiar with Bailey Zappy, former Houston Baptist quarterback, and that scheme that they had was just nuts. Like they were throwing the ball, I think 54 times a game in 2020. They played 4 games against FBS opponents that year, and he just put up absolutely absurd numbers, throwing to his favorite target in Jarrett Stearns, who declared this year also. Western Kentucky brings over a bunch of coaching staff, the entire offense, like set of offensive skilled players for Houston Baptist. They joined Western Kentucky along with like 20 other transfers and completely turned their program around and jump from like bottom of the Conference USA type situation to the conference championship in 1 year, thanks to Bailey Zappy breaking the all-time like single season passing touchdowns record with 62 in a season in 14 games. 62 passing touchdowns, passing that of Joe Burrow in his crazy 2019 season, passing the all-time record for passing yards in a season. He was just shy of 6,000 passing yards in 14 games. And so and it wasn't that he was just volume driven. Like he was efficient on almost 700 passing attempts. And like it was like 90th percentile plus pass efficiency on 700 attempts. Like that's never been done before in the history of college football. And so he's not the toolsiest guy. He's not going to wow you with, 60-yard bombs. But could he pull a Gardner Minshew and be a lot of fun? Absolutely.
Gardner, there's no one more fun than Gardner Minshew, man.
He's not going to be that personality.
Out there with his swords and his mustaches. So we talked about those top two guys.
Quick, Mike.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Before we move on, I want to kind of look at the other side of the coin here, because we're talking a lot about these quarterbacks that you think can ascend, who might not have these great profiles, right, as prospects. But on the other side of it, I've gotten a lot of trade questions regarding Trevor Lawrence, right? What do you do with a guy who, from all angles as a prospect, just looked phenomenal, who kind of craters? And I think a lot of it had to do with Urban Meyer, but at the same time, how much does that stunt their growth and affect their career trajectory? We've seen some of these highly rated guys, like a Sam Darnold or a Baker Mayfield, just not pan out even with good rookie seasons. So what does that mean for a guy like Lawrence?
I think this second year is going to be incredibly important. If we look at historical data on quarterbacks and when they peak, most of the most significant leap and improvement in production for fantasy purposes and just for real life purpose, from QBR to any kind of passing metric improvement, we see the biggest leap when you look at big sample data, like from first year to second year. And then a bunch of people, if they don't do it then, it's from second to third year. And many players peak at that point, and they're never actually the same again. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that, it's probably more to do with rookie contract structures these days than anything, because a lot of players that are just good enough don't even get a second contract. So we see that peak come earlier from a collective quarterback standpoint, year 2, year 3. But from an individual standpoint, the guys who have that staying power and still see the most significant leap in year 2 and year 3. Most of the times year 2. And I think Trevor Lawrence can't get any worse than he was last year. If you look at the number of forced throws, any source you want to use, like Pro Football Focus, Sports Info Solutions, the guys that really dig in through the data and really call passes bad passes, essentially. He led the league for several weeks to begin the year. And a lot of that had to do with the fact, though, that he's just so freaking confident in his arm and his ability that he's forcing things. And I think he got away with that at Clemson because he had these trees at T. Higgins and Justin Ross and even some smaller shifty guys like Hunter Renfrow that could create their own space, and he could just make every throw and throw guys open. But in the pros, he had to learn a lot really fast that he probably can't make all those throws that would probably actually be bad throws if not for the player he's throwing to. So he's going to have to clean that up in terms of his decision-making in year 2 in a big way if we want to see him stick in the NFL. But if he doesn't stick in the NFL, we all should just stop evaluating the quarterback position because we don't know anything.
Right. Again, he was that, generational talent that we always talk about. And in Dynasty, he's become, last year he was going in the first round, which is just absurd, taking a rookie quarterback in the startups. Now he's fallen into rounds 2, 3, and now he's, I feel like we're going to see a nice uptick there and you just kind of bounce back. With the wide receivers, we talked about those two guys in those top class. The next class, from what we've been looking at, is pretty even for a while here, and it's a longer list. We got guys like Drake London and Jamison Williams, David Bell, George Pickens, Wan'Dale Robinson, even Chris Olave. There's a good group of wide receivers here, about 8 guys deep. Do any of those guys separate themselves to you? Do you put maybe Olave and some of these other guys in a tier above, or do you have a bigger tier like that as well?
I have a big group here where I'm looking at landing spots. And they're all different types of players too. Drake London, how do you compare Drake London to Chris Olave or Drake London to Jahan Dotson or Drake London, for goodness sakes, to Wan'Dale Robinson? They're just completely different archetypes across the board among all these top tier players. And so I think a lot of people want to place Drake London up in that conversation with Burks. I think he's much slower than Burks. I think Drake London has a great resume in terms of his contested catch ability. And I think I've seen a few people talk about how he just creates separation at different points, than a fast, shifty wide receiver would. He doesn't rely on that first step. He doesn't rely on, just that quickness. He's got some nuance to his game, even at the catch point where he just creates space at the last second and wows. And so I love Drake London quite a bit. Chris Olave, I believe, is one of the best deep threats in the country. I think a lot of people undervalue that aspect to his game because they got stuck on just watching this past season where he had a significantly lower average depth of target than in the 2 preceding years. But he had 19 touchdowns on plays where targets were more than 20 yards downfield. That's more than I believe any player in that same span in college football. And so, yeah, Jameson Williams, I'm really high on him. If he was healthy completely,
that's my guy.
He would probably be my wide receiver 3.
And he is performing at the combine, correct?
I don't think so.
No,
no, I don't think so.
Are we?
No, he and Mechie, I think, are going to be out. So that's a bummer.
Right. Yeah, no, because we're like, if he gets out there, I mean, he's got 4.3 potential wheels, and that's going to shoot him up boards.
Yeah, and it stinks we can't see that, and I'm not sure he really even, he's fully healthy by week 1 of this year. I think it would be a big leap to assume that would be the case for him or Mechie. Really, I mean, doctors are getting insane and rehab times are shortening, but it's just not a sure thing. So I think I have questions, and I think because of that, and even after the NFL draft, after he gets selected, people are going to be reminded, he's not even close to ready for OTAs. Okay, I'm going to let him drop a little bit, and so I think that's why for me, I'm not ranking him as a surefire wide receiver 3, but he's in that tier for sure.
Mm-hmm. The other guy that, he also had the ACL tear, but I mean, in 2022, a lot of times, or in 2021, people looked at him as potentially the wide receiver 1 and George Pickens. George Pickens is a guy that I think is very polarizing as well right now because people are, you put your rankings out there on Twitter and people are going to be like, you're too low on George Pickens. There's so many people that are George Pickens fans.
Yeah, and I think it's just if you're not ranking him low, you're just being incredibly optimistic, because I think I bake in a little bit of risk. I like to do that, a healthy amount of risk given the situation and given his instant impact. We did see some version of George Pickens come back at the end of the season, but he was not exactly the same. He had that one really good play in the national championship where he laid out like completely horizontally, but that was his only catch in the entire game. And so we were used to seeing this dominant athlete who just destroyed people on go balls and comebacks and after the catch and, took up 30% or more of Georgia's passing offense for a good portion of 2020. And even like when he was a true freshman, he was doing that. So from an analytical perspective, he broke out super early, checks all the boxes you want to see. But from a film standpoint, he's a DK Metcalf type that is not as athletic, actually. Like, he's not as fast. And I don't think he's as freakish just overall athletically. But he's basically just a go, curl, comeback guy. And so he's probably going to have to add some layers to his game, and I think he can. And I think he has the upside to be the wide receiver 1 overall in this class. But I have him ranked like wide receiver 7 or 8 just because I'm thinking instant impact in year 1. And I don't think I'm getting that unless he's in the perfect spot. So I could probably acquire him for cheaper later than, if I ranked him as my wide receiver 3, where his upside probably lies.
I like it. We always try to keep everybody to about that hour mark because I know your time is super valuable. But if you had to pick right now, like most of our listeners, they're really jumping in round 1, round 2. They're starting to get those names. Talk to me about a couple guys that could go, and I know we have a long process here, but some guys that they should start paying attention with their 3rd round rookie picks, the guys that might be really rising up some boards that you're involved in the Devy community, so you are a lot more involved in what those things are. But some guys that might be 3rd round, 4th round kind of guys that they might be able to really sneak into their drafts.
I'm not sure it's going to land this way eventually when it's all said and done. And I think that some mock drafts in fantasy circles are having him go higher. But Rashaad White, I think real draft people don't have him high enough just yet. I think he actually performs pretty well at the NFL Combine, so I don't think he's going to be that 3rd round rookie or even in the conversation for late 2. Maybe when it's all said and done, he's my running back 5. right now, and so that's probably higher than most people have Rashaad White, but he should go higher than most everyone has him ranked right now. Like he was one of the best, if not the best, receiving back in the nation. Averaged 11 yards per touch in 2020. He took the JUCO route, junior college that is, and so he didn't have like the earlier breakout. He's a little bit older, but as far as running backs, able to make an instant impact. He's like 6'2", 210, 215. Like he's built like an old X wide receiver, but he's a running back and he can make you miss inside a phone booth, whatever. He can do all those things from an elusiveness standpoint. Got a super high missed tackle force rate. And so we see a guy where the film and the analytics kind of agree is probably a good player. If he tests out well athletically, I think most people are going to come around on Rashaad White. And I don't think they're going to come around on like the stereotypical big running back guys like Brian Robinson Jr. or James Cook or Zamir White. I don't think that they're probably going to be overdrafted. And if Rashaad White is going after them, that's probably a mistake. So I'm keeping an eye on Rashaad White regardless of where he's actually drafted. Even if he's around 4 back, I don't care. Like a la Ramondre Stevenson just a year ago, I would be interested in taking him early round 3 all day long if he does go in round 4. That's probably my favorite running back prospect in this class. Yeah. But I think that there are other guys like a Jarian Ely that I think most people, because of his size and because of his, less than stellar production profile arc, because they don't understand the full context of, what got him to where he is, we don't have him ranked very highly at all, but I'm going to be grabbing him every single place, even if he's drafted in round 5. I don't care because the dude could be playing professional baseball if he wanted to. He was a 5-star talent coming out of high school. He was running sub 4.5 40 and showing bursts like from age like 16. Like he's an absolute. I think that he probably could impress at the NFL Combine more so than any other back, just from a raw metric standpoint. I think like his size adjusted stuff isn't going to be crazy, but he's gonna be in the 4.4s. He's gonna jump probably 40 inches in the vert. He's gonna have a really high broad jump. He's gonna kill it in all the agility. Like he's probably gonna be the most impressive back that's probably undersized, right? Maybe he's that Elijah Mitchell from last year that people kind of overlook because, with him it was competition questions. But Ely has all the pedigree, all the athletic ability, and he's a great receiving back too. He was coming off of shoulder surgery this past year, had to miss all the baseball season, basically had to quit baseball. And then even once the season began, he wasn't really himself and had to share too many touches with Henry Parrish and Snoop Connor. So we didn't see this crazy peak production year that we could have seen last fall. But Jarian Ely is one of my favorites. And he was a guy who was taken early in Devy drafts, even like 2-3 years ago.
So I like watching your reactions when you're talking about these guys because you can tell you light up on certain players, and those are definitely guys that I'm going to be looking out there for Ely and White as well. I want to thank you very much for coming on. Why don't you tell everybody where they can find all of your work? And if you guys aren't, you guys gotta follow Travis. You gotta check out what he does from campus to Canton. It's been a long day. It started out with a lot of awesomeness, but take us home here.
Sure, man. Yeah, I used to write for way too many places, but I consolidated. And so most of my stuff you can find at rotoviz.com for all of your Devy fantasy football, college fantasy football, DFS, and NFL draft, and all things football, really, there. And then you can find weekly stats pieces for college football goodness, just for college football fans at solidverbal.com. And then my podcast that you can find on our own feed and RotoViz Radio is the College to Canton podcast that I do with Stefan Leco. But that's generally me. But appreciate you guys having me on again. Anytime, man. Love talking rookies, love talking NFL, college, all the above.
Yeah, thank you so much, Travis. I appreciate it. Mung, what's cooking for you?
Yeah, just update all my dynasty rankings. You can find those over at Fantrax. You can find me on Twitter at FFA_Mung. That's MENG. And real quick before we close out, I wanted to bring this full circle, Travis. We talked about somebody talking about trading the 103 for a random 2023 first, right?
Yeah.
Without knowing landing spots, without knowing combine numbers right now, how far down are you willing to go before you say I'm out on this first round draft pick for a shot at a Jackson or a Bijan, or in Superflex maybe a Stroud or a Young.
Yeah, if it really is like a true random first for next year, and like there's not an obvious team that's just absolutely terrible and tanking, I think if you get to like 105 ish, I'd probably take a look, maybe 106 ish. Yeah, I think that's the sweet spot just to take because you're probably missing on your running back one, or you're missing your wide receiver one, or you're missing your quarterback one. If you get beyond pick 3 or 4 this year, you're probably not going to have the most ideal landing spot for your guy. So I'm okay. Like once you get to pick 5, shooting for the stars with a Bijan Robinson, Jahmyr Gibbs, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Kayshon Boutte, one of those clear players that's going to be, in the top 10 draft capital conversation, maybe even at running back again. Next year's class is really stacked. We could see a resurgence of a capital investment next year too. So very intriguing next year's class. But great question there.
And for those of you guys that drafted with me and smashed except 3, and you let me have 8 23 firsts, it's gonna be a fun year, once we start that draft. But thanks again for tuning in, guys, and